So hey guys, it's Zion again. Dark Souls 2. The bosses. They suck. The question is why they suck. And in this companion video to my Why the Dark Souls 2 Sucks on TopTierTactics.com, I'm going to discuss another reason why I think the bosses in Dark Souls 2 are by far and away inferior to the Dark Souls 1 bosses. And the first thing is that they're not nearly as inspired as the Dark Souls 1 bosses. They're not memorable. There's nothing that really stands out. I'm fighting the last giant, and I'll be fighting the old Dragon Slayer, aka Ornstein version 2.0. But neither of these bosses stands out. It's just, with the last giant, you're just hitting his feet a whole lot. With Ornstein, he's using dark magic, and he doesn't feel inspired. He doesn't feel like I should even care that he's there. He's not guarding anything of any real value besides a covenant. And if you looked at the bosses in Dark Souls 1, you'd see that there was always a story to be told by the environment in which you found them. Now, of course, with the last giant, we have this early cutscene that sort of tells a story that he's been trapped here for a very long time, that you're entering this area not only wakes him up, but reminds him of something so rage-inducing that he has to break his, I think it's left arm in order to get out, and then he attacks you with it. There's story in this boss fight. But all the same, as an early boss fight, it's not memorable. You just stand by his heels and hit him a bunch. There's no real strategy to it. It's just avoiding getting stepped on. And then, of course, you have some other boss fights that are really just bosses between you and the next map transition. Guardian Dragon comes to mind. Ornstein 2.0 comes to mind. All of these bosses serve no real purpose but as barriers to plot progression. Now, that argument could easily be made for the Dark Souls 1 bosses as well. Ornstein and Smough, for example, you have to beat them, and if you don't read anything into it, they're just a really stupidly, not difficult, but annoying boss that you have to fight to get to the Lord Vessel and then get to the Lord Souls. But then you think about it, you think, these are people, they have likely fought off hundreds upon hundreds of people just like you trying to get to the Lord Vessel, chosen undead candidates. And obviously, they've succeeded in each time, and you, as the chosen undead, it is your very fate to fight them, probably die, but defeat them in the end. When you look at something like the old Dragon Slayer, or say the last giant, the only reason you're fighting them is because you have to. Because the game says, these are people that are in your way, please go kill them. And again, I don't want to get into the map design because that's the video for another time, but these bosses are at the ends of things. The bosses are the terminus instead of a continuing point. In Dark Souls 1, what made that game and the bosses in that game so interesting and so wonderful to fight against was the fact that they were only a means to continue the story, and there was almost never a time when you were not moving somewhere when you fought these bosses. When you're fighting someone like the old Dragon Slayer, you're not really fighting anyone to get anywhere. That you're getting to a bonfire and a guy who, unless you have a very, not really rare item, that gives you access to a PvP covenant. This boss serves the purpose of blocking your entryway to that and that only. Now, if you want to look into it, well, it's someone in Ornstein's armor, and it's someone who uses dark magic in Ornstein's armor, and who is much, much smaller than Ornstein himself actually was. But again, Ornstein was a noble knight of Gwyn, and he served his master well in the years that Guinevere held the Lord Vessel, or Gwendolyn and the illusion of Guinevere held the Lord Vessel. But here, again, what's there to remember about this boss fight? It's a bunch of dodging, and then you go in for the hack and slash, and it's just dodge, attack, block with shield, attack. Whereas with Ornstein and Smough, for example, you were always having to think, always having to weave your way around the battlefield. And if you think about a singular boss fight, like say Velstad. Velstad is one of the few bosses that for me means more than his fight itself. Again, he is a lesser boss because he is simply a barrier to plot progression, but he serves a real purpose. Old Dragon Slayer doesn't. Velstad, as uninspired as that boss fight really is, because, oh, he gets to half HP, oh, he takes half damage. That's not an inspired boss fight. That's just a boss fight that just gets tedious. But the comparison, I think, stands. Because he's guarding not only his king, but the king's ring that Vendrick has cast off. That Vendrick has given up, or, for better or for worse, sacrificed. Because you see he's walking around naked, hollowed. He's sacrificed everything. And he did not wish to be used against his own will, and so he cast off his ring, he cast off his armor, and essentially relegated himself to wandering in abject madness for all eternity. So again, while the battlefield is essentially just a very flat plain with not much story behind it, the same goes for Velstad. Velstad is almost the exact same battle space as the old Dragon Slayer fight, it's just a little bit thinner and a little bit longer. It serves a purpose. And Velstad as a character is interesting to me, simply because of the way he's designed. The fact that he doesn't attack you with an axe or a hammer. He has a bell filled with dark magic, which is consistent with the lore of Dark Souls 2. You don't cast hexes with a staff unless you're using the Black Witch's staff. You don't cast miracles with a staff. You don't cast miracles with a talisman. You cast it with a chime. And that's one of the things about Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2 I love, is that we have this really interesting mechanic with the chimes. But again, he's channeling some kind of power that has either been given to him or that he's developed for the time that he's spent as the guardian of his fallen king. And so much in the same way that Ornstein and Smoke guarded access to Gwyn in Dark Souls 1, Velstad guards access to Vendrick, and then Vendrick's key, of course. But then you look at the duel or even tri-battles that you fight in this game, and they're nothing like Ornstein and Smoke. Not even close. That the Watcher and Defender fight is really just... that is also an exercise in tedium. The Ruins Sentinel fight, for me, was just frustrating. And I keep thinking back to Dark Souls 1 because for me, I want to take these two games in isolation, and I imagine that if I actually did, they would be such better games. If Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 were completely separate games in the same series, I would think, oh, these are both fantastic games, but I cannot take them in isolation. So I'm left thinking back to some of the fights in Dark Souls 1, like the Four Kings. The atmosphere in that fight was fantastic. I hated Bed of Chaos, but the story behind it was fantastic. I did not like Nito, but the Lord Souls bosses, essentially, I did not like them as boss fights because I thought they were either easy or tedious, but all the same, I absolutely loved the atmosphere that surrounds them. And I can't say that for any of the Great Soul bosses here. For example, the old Iron King is boring. It's just, if he's going to slam the ground at you, you dodge out of the way, hit his fist a few times. If he's going to breathe fire at you, you hide behind a wall. It is literally, those two tactics win you the boss fight. You cannot say the same thing about Nito. You have to think about the skeletons. You have to take into the fact that there are two types of skeletons. Think into the fact that maybe Nito can't hit you at certain places. With the Four Kings, there will be more kings that spawn in. With Bed of Chaos, there's, as much as I hated the fact that they were like, hey, how do we make this fight harder? Death pits. You always had to think about that fight. Whereas in Lost Sinner, in Old Iron King, in The Rotten, it's just a matter of dodging and learning the patterns. There's very little skill required. It's all just learning and exploiting. So that's going to be the end of my boss video. I want to thank you guys for watching. In the next video, we'll be talking about map design and why it is also far worse in Dark Souls 2 than it was in Dark Souls 1. I'll see you next time.